It was supposed to be an ordinary evening. The kind where I grabbed dinner after a long day at work, scrolled through my phone while waiting for the check, and returned home to my quiet apartment without a second thought. But life has a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. I was halfway through a plate of grilled salmon at a cozy corner table in a downtown restaurant when I saw her. Megan, my ex-wife. At first, I wasn't sure it was her. 5 years had passed since I'd last seen her, and time has a way of making even the most familiar faces seem distant. But then she laughed, that same melodic sound that used to fill our home, and the memories came rushing back like a tidal wave. She was seated across the room, her auburn hair catching the soft light of the restaurant's chandeliers. She looked the same, beautiful, confident, and effortlessly radiant, like the years had done nothing to dull her spark. She was with someone. A man in his early 40s, well-dressed, with the kind of casual charm that suggested he knew how lucky he was to be sitting across from her. I looked away quickly, but the damage was done. Seeing her reopened wounds I thought had long since healed. My appetite vanished, replaced by a tight knot in my chest. The salmon suddenly tasted bland, the restaurant too noisy, and the air too thick to breathe. I tried to focus on my plate, but my mind had already betrayed me, pulling me back to the days when Megan and I were together. Back to when everything seemed perfect. Back to when I thought I was the luckiest man in the world. And back to the events that destroyed us. Megan and I had been married for 7 years before it all fell apart. We'd met in college, a whirlwind romance that turned into something real and lasting, or so I thought. We were the kind of couple people admired, or at least pretended to. Friends joked that we were the power couple, always finishing each other's sentences and sharing private jokes no one else understood. But beneath the surface, cracks had already begun to form. At first, they were small, little arguments over forgotten anniversaries or late nights at the office. Then came the bigger fights, ones we couldn't sweep under the rug. We started living parallel lives, orbiting around each other without ever truly connecting. And then there was the betrayal. I'll never forget the day I found out. It wasn't some dramatic revelation or a tear-filled confession. It was quiet, almost mundane. A stray text message on her phone that she'd left on the kitchen counter. A message that wasn't meant for me. The words were burned into my memory. Last night was incredible. Can't wait to see you again. I confronted her that evening. She denied it at first, her voice trembling as she tried to explain it away. But the evidence was there, undeniable and damning. The text messages. The late-night meetings that weren't on her calendar. The way she'd stopped looking at me like I was the center of her world. Her affair had been going on for months, maybe longer. I didn't have the energy to dig into the specifics. All I knew was that the woman I had built my life around had betrayed me in the most intimate way possible. Our divorce was quick and clean, at least on paper. Megan didn't contest it, and I didn't drag it out. But the emotional scars lingered long after the ink had dried on the documents. I left our home, our friends, and the life we'd built together, retreating into a solitude that felt safer than the chaos she had left behind. And now, 5 years later, here she was, laughing with someone else in the same restaurant where I sat alone. I couldn't stop myself from glancing at her again. She looked happy, genuinely so, and it twisted something inside me. I wanted to hate her, to cling to the bitterness that had kept me going in the aftermath of our divorce. But instead, I felt something far worse. Longing. A part of me wanted to walk over to her table, to see if she'd even recognize me, to ask if she'd thought about me at all in the years since we parted. But I stayed rooted to my seat, my hands clenched into fists under the table. As I finished my meal and signaled for the check, I caught her looking in my direction. Our eyes met, just for a moment, and her smile faltered. It was brief, so fleeting I could have imagined it. But the look in her eyes was unmistakable. Recognition, and something else. Regret. The day I found out about Megan's betrayal was seared into my memory like a wound that would never fully heal. It wasn't just the act itself. It was the layers of humiliation, disbelief, and heartbreak that came with it. Even now, years later, I could still feel the hollow ache in my chest when I thought about it. It started with a canceled trip. I was supposed to fly out for a conference, one of those dreary work obligations that made me resent my job. I'd packed my bags the night before, kissed Megan goodbye in the morning, and promised to call her once I landed. But just as I was leaving for the airport, a call came in. The conference had been postponed due to bad weather. First, I was relieved. A weekend at home with Megan sounded infinitely better than sitting through hours of corporate presentations. I decided to surprise her, stopping at her favorite bakery on the way home to pick up those little lemon tarts she loved. Felt good, almost nostalgic, to do something thoughtful for her. I hadn't realized how much distance had crept into our marriage until that moment. But when I pulled into the driveway, something felt off. Megan's car was there as expected, but the blinds in the living room were drawn, a rare occurrence during the day. I dismissed the unease as paranoia, telling myself I was overthinking things. I stepped into the house quietly, balancing the bakery box in one hand while closing the door with the other. The silence hit me first. Our home was never this quiet when Megan was around. She always had music playing or the TV on in the background. But today, there was nothing except the faint hum of the refrigerator. I walked through the foyer and into the living room, and that's when I heard it, a low, muffled sound coming from upstairs. At first, I thought it was the TV, but as I stood there, straining to listen, the noises became clearer. Voices, laughter, the unmistakable creak of our bed. My stomach dropped. A cold, sickening realization crept over me as I set the bakery box on the counter, my hands trembling. I didn't want to believe it, but every step I took toward the stairs confirmed my worst fears. The laughter grew louder, mingling with sounds I couldn't pretend to misunderstand. I climbed the stairs slowly, each creak of the wood beneath my feet like a drumbeat in my ears. My heart raced, pounding so hard I thought it might burst. When I reached the landing, the door to our bedroom was slightly ajar. Through the gap, I could see shadows moving on the walls, flickering like grotesque silhouettes in some twisted play. I should have left. I should have turned around, walked out of the house, and spared myself what I was about to see. But something held me there, frozen in place, my hand hovering over the door. With a deep breath, I pushed it open. The scene inside felt like a nightmare, too surreal to be real. Megan was on the bed, tangled in sheets and sweat, surrounded by 4 men. Among them was her boss, Lucas, a man she'd mentioned countless times, always with a hint of admiration in her voice. The others were strangers, their faces blurred by the haze of my disbelief. Time seemed to slow as I stood there, unable to move, unable to breathe. Megan didn't see me at first, too lost in the moment to notice the man she had vowed to love standing in the doorway. When her eyes finally met mine, the color drained from her face. "Jack," she gasped, scrambling to cover herself with the sheet. The others stopped abruptly, their laughter and grunts replaced by a heavy silence. I didn't say a word, couldn't. My mind was racing, my emotions a chaotic storm of rage, betrayal, and heartbreak. Without thinking, I pulled my phone from my pocket and hit record. My hands shook as I pointed the camera at the bed, capturing everything. The scene, their faces, Megan's panicked attempts to shield herself. "What the hell are you doing?" Lucas barked, stepping forward as if to block the camera. "Stay where you are," I said, my voice low and cold. It didn't even sound like me. Megan started to cry, her tears streaming down her face as she pleaded with me. "Jack, please, I can explain. It's not what it looks like." I laughed bitterly, the sound hollow and sharp. "It's exactly what it looks like, Megan. Don't insult me." I kept recording, even as the pain of what I was seeing tore through me like a blade. Every second felt like an eternity, but I forced myself to endure it. I needed the evidence. I needed to make sure there was no way she could twist this, no way she could deny what she had done. After what felt like an eternity, I stopped recording and lowered the phone. My hands were still shaking, but I didn't let them see it. I looked at Megan one last time, her tear-streaked face a mix of guilt and desperation. "We're done," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Then I turned and walked out, leaving the shattered remains of my marriage behind me. As I stepped outside into the cool air, The weight of what I had just witnessed threatened to crush me. But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours after leaving the house, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The video I had recorded was burning a hole in my pocket, but no amount of evidence could change the fact that my marriage was over. The betrayal wasn't just an emotional wound. It was a wrecking ball that had obliterated the life I thought I had built with Megan. When I finally pulled into a quiet parking lot, I sat in silence, staring at the dashboard and replaying the events in my mind. The image of Megan with Lucas and those other men, the sound of her voice pleading with me, the sheer audacity of what I had witnessed. It all churned in my chest like a storm. Couldn't let it go. Not yet. She deserved consequences, and I wasn't going to let her walk away from this unscathed. My mind raced as I pieced together a plan. Something that would make her feel even a fraction of the humiliation and helplessness she had inflicted on me. It wasn't about physical retaliation or getting the law involved, not yet. It was about disrupting her world, reminding her that actions had consequences. I drove back to the house late that night, parking a block away to avoid drawing attention. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of suburban silence that made every sound seem amplified. With a deep breath, I grabbed the tools I had thrown into the back seat, tire deflation kits and heavy-duty locks I'd picked up on the way, and set to work. First, I blocked their cars. Megan's sleek sedan and Lucas's obnoxiously flashy sports car were parked in the driveway. I maneuvered my car behind them, effectively boxing them in. Even if they somehow managed to get the cars out, I made sure they wouldn't get far. I deflated all the tires, leaving them flat and useless. The hiss of escaping air was strangely satisfying, a small act of defiance in the face of everything I had endured. Next, I locked the house. Using one of the heavy-duty locks I had bought, I secured the front door from the outside. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it would buy me time to carry out the rest of my plan. With the front door sealed, I knew Megan would have a hard time leaving for work in the morning. Satisfied with my handiwork, I stepped back to survey the scene. The driveway looked like a mechanic's worst nightmare, and the house was locked tighter than a fortress. For the first time since I'd left earlier that day, I felt a flicker of control, a small victory in the chaos she had created. As the sun rose, I decided it was time to escalate things. I called the police, reporting what I had witnessed. I described the scene in excruciating detail, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and exhaustion. She was with 4 men, I told the officer on the line. One of them is her boss. I have a video that proves everything. The officer's tone was calm but firm as he asked me to clarify. Were there signs of coercion? Did you witness anything that indicated she was in danger or being forced? I hesitated, the question catching me off guard. No, I admitted. It seemed consensual. But it's disgusting. It's adultery. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Sir, while I understand how upsetting this situation is for you, adultery isn't a criminal offense. If her actions were consensual, there's nothing we can pursue from a legal standpoint. I clenched my jaw, my grip tightening on the phone. So, you're telling me they get away with this? The officer's voice softened. I know this must be incredibly painful, but unless there was a crime committed, there's nothing we can do. I recommend consulting a lawyer if you plan to take legal action in your divorce. I hung up, my chest heaving with frustration. The law couldn't help me, and the police weren't going to hold Megan or her so-called friends accountable. I was on my own. As the morning unfolded, the consequences of my actions began to take shape. Megan called me repeatedly, her voice frantic in the voicemails she left. "Jack, what the hell did you do?" she screamed in one of the messages. "I can't get out of the house. My tires are flat. This is insane. Call me back." I didn't answer. I let her stew in the mess she had created, ignoring the calls and the texts that followed. Her desperation was a small comfort, a reminder that she wasn't as untouchable as she thought. Later that day, I received a call from Lucas. His voice dripped with smug condescension. "Real mature, Jack," he said. "You're making this worse for yourself, you know? If you think this is going to fix anything, I hung up on him, unwilling to listen to another word. By the time the day ended, Megan had managed to call a locksmith and a tow truck to deal with the damage. But the point had been made. I disrupted her perfect little world. And for now, that was enough. Still, as I sat in my apartment that evening, staring at the video on my phone, I knew this wasn't over. The legal system wouldn't help me, but there were other ways to make her, and Lucas, pay for what they had done. It was late, and the silence in my apartment felt heavier than usual. I sat on the edge of my bed, the faint glow of my phone illuminating the video I'd recorded in my house. Proof of Megan's betrayal. Yet, as damning as it was, a gnawing sense of incompleteness crept over me. Something about the events of that day didn't sit right. Megan's audacity, her brazenness. It felt too casual, too rehearsed. Like there was more to her deceit than I had uncovered. Fueled by a mix of rage and curiosity, I decided to dig deeper. The next morning, I returned to the house. The locksmith had removed the extra lock I'd installed, and the driveway was empty, save for faint tread marks from the tow truck. Megan must have left for work, assuming the chaos of the previous day was behind her. But she was wrong. I entered the house, the familiar scent of Megan's perfume lingering in the air like a bitter reminder of what I had lost. My goal was simple: find everything she had hidden from me. Every secret email, every message, every piece of evidence that would reveal the extent of her betrayal. I started with her office. The small, meticulously organized desk was where she spent hours each evening, ostensibly working on freelance projects or catching up on emails. But now I saw it for what it truly was, a fortress of lies. The first discovery came quickly. Her laptop, left open but locked with a password, was an obvious target. Megan had always been careful but not careful enough. Her password hadn't changed in years. I typed in her favorite author's name, Austin22, and the screen unlocked with a soft chime. My heart pounded as I navigated to her emails, bracing myself for what I might find. The first few messages were mundane work correspondence, promotional offers, and the occasional exchange with her family. But then, buried in the archived folder, I found something that made my stomach turn. A series of emails spanning 3 years, written to and from various men. Some I recognized, colleagues, friends we'd invited to our home, even the yoga instructor Megan had raved about during her weekend classes. Others were strangers, their names unfamiliar but their intentions clear. The messages varied in tone. Some were flirtatious and coy, others explicit to the point of nausea. But they all painted the same picture. Megan had been cheating on me for years, not just with one man, but with a rotating cast of partners. Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about it. Jack is out of town again this weekend. Come over. You always know how to make me feel alive. Thank you for keeping our secret. Each email was a knife to the chest, a brutal confirmation of how thoroughly she had betrayed me. But the most damning discovery came in the form of a draft email to her closest friend, Rebecca. It was never sent but saved in her drafts folder, likely forgotten in the chaos of her deceit. The subject line was chilling: plans for the divorce. I opened it, my hands trembling as I read the words Megan had written. Rebecca, is finally happening. Jack's been distant for months, and I think he's starting to catch on. But don't worry, I've been careful. When the time comes, I'll make sure the divorce works in my favor. He's clueless about the accounts I've been moving around, and the prenup doesn't cover anything I've earned on the side. Plus, if he finds out about the affairs, I'll flip it on him. Say he was controlling, distant, and emotionally neglectful. People will believe me. They always do. This isn't about revenge. It's about freedom. I deserve better, and I'm finally going to get it. Megan. The room seemed to spin as I stared at the screen. Her words were calculating, cold, and devoid of any remorse. This wasn't just an affair. It was a meticulously planned betrayal. She had intended to destroy me, to use our marriage and its dissolution as a stepping stone for her own gain. But the discoveries didn't stop there. Hidden in a folder labeled work documents were video files, footage from a discreetly placed camera in our bedroom. My stomach churned as I clicked on the first video. It was Megan with another man, and then another, and another. The dates on the files spanned years, each one more damning than the last. Friends, colleagues, strangers, all paraded through the most private space in our home. By the time I had finished watching, my anger had reached a boiling point. The betrayal wasn't just emotional or physical, it was systematic. Megan had lied, cheated, and plotted against me with a level of precision that bordered on psychopathy. I copied everything, the emails, the videos, the draft letter, to a secure drive and deleted the originals from her computer. If she thought she could manipulate the divorce to her advantage, she was sorely mistaken. When I left the house that day, I wasn't the same man who had walked in. The hurt was still there, raw and searing, but it was accompanied by something else: determination. Megan had underestimated me, and that would be her downfall. I wasn't just going to fight back, I was going to win. As I drove away from the house, the USB drive containing Megan's web of deceit sat heavy in my pocket. The evidence I'd uncovered wasn't just damning. It was a goldmine. Emails, videos, financial manipulations, and even her premeditated plans for the divorce. It was everything I needed to take her down, not with reckless anger, but with cold, calculated precision. I wasn't going to let her walk away unscathed, not after everything she had done. The first person I called was Adam Carter's, an old college friend and one of the sharpest lawyers I knew. Adam had always been there when I needed him, steady, reliable, and most importantly, ruthless when it came to justice. He picked up on the third ring, his familiar deep voice instantly reassuring. "Jack, what's up, man? It's been a while." I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Adam, I need your help. It's about Megan." There was a pause. "Your ex? What's going on?" I gave him the barest outline: her infidelity, the hidden videos, the emails, and her plans to manipulate the divorce. Adam listened quietly, his tone growing sharper with each detail. "Jack," he finally said, his voice calm but firm, "this is a mess, but it sounds like you've got enough evidence to bury her. Are you looking to press charges? Sue for damages?" "Both," I said without hesitation. "I want her to pay for everything she's done, and not just her. Lucas too. All of them." Adam didn't even flinch. "All right, bring me what you've got, and we'll figure out the best way to proceed." The next day, I sat in Adam's downtown office, the USB drive clutched in my hand like a lifeline. He took it from me, plugging it into his computer as I recounted the events in detail. He watched the videos with a grim expression, flipping through the emails and the draft letter without a word. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "This is a lot, Jack," he said, his tone measured. "You've got evidence of infidelity, workplace misconduct, financial manipulation, and even potential invasion of privacy on her part. If we play our cards right, we could file multiple lawsuits and build a case strong enough to take down everyone involved." I nodded, my jaw tight. "Good. What's the first step?" Adam leaned forward, his eyes narrowing with focus. "We start by filing for divorce, obviously. With this evidence, you'll have the upper hand. We'll aim to invalidate any claims she might have to shared assets, especially given the financial deceit you've uncovered. Next, we go after Lucas. As her boss, he's in a compromising position. If we can prove that their relationship violated workplace policies or created a hostile environment, we can build a case against him and the company." "And the others?" I asked, my voice cold. Adam tapped his pen against the desk. "This gets trickier. Legally, their participation in the affairs isn't actionable unless it impacted you directly. Like if they defamed you, caused emotional distress, or damaged your reputation. We'd need to be strategic about how we approach it. But Lucas, he's a prime target. His position as her boss makes him vulnerable to a professional misconduct suit, and we can leverage that to drag him into the spotlight." A small smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. "Perfect. I want him to feel the heat." Over the next few weeks, Adam and his team worked tirelessly to prepare the case. The first step was serving Megan with divorce papers. When she received them, her reaction was immediate and explosive. She called me repeatedly, leaving furious voicemails laced with denial and venom. "Jack, you're being ridiculous." One of her messages raged. "You're throwing away everything we built because of some stupid misunderstanding. You're going to regret this." But I didn't answer. My silence was louder than any response. Lucas, too, received his own unwelcome surprise. Adam had filed a lawsuit against him for workplace misconduct, using the emails and videos as evidence of his inappropriate relationship with Megan. Word spread quickly through his company, and within days, Lucas was placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. The smug arrogance he'd displayed in our brief phone call was nowhere to be found. Megan's friends, the ones I'd identified through her emails, weren't spared either. While we couldn't sue them directly, Adam found ways to implicate them in the broader legal strategy. Subpoenas were issued, their involvement brought into the spotlight. One by one, the walls began closing in on everyone who had been complicit in Megan's betrayal. The fallout was swift and brutal. Megan's professional reputation, once a point of pride, was left in tatters as word of her infidelity and manipulation spread. Lucas's career took a nosedive, the lawsuit painting him as a predator who had exploited his position for personal gain. And the others? Their names and actions became fodder for gossip and scrutiny, their private lives exposed in the harshest light. Through it all, I maintained my composure, even as the emotional toll threatened to overwhelm me. Adam's confidence and determination kept me grounded, reminding me that this wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. Megan had spent years undermining our marriage, plotting against me while I remained oblivious. Now, she was finally facing the consequences of her actions. By the time the first hearings were scheduled, the weight of what I had set in motion began to sink in. This wasn't just a personal vendetta anymore. It was a reckoning, one that would reshape the lives of everyone involved. And for the first time in years, I felt like I had regained control of my own life. The courtroom was hushed as the verdicts were read, the sound of the judge's gavel reverberating like a thunderclap. For months, the legal battle had consumed Jack's life, an all-out war waged in the sterile confines of lawyers' offices and judicial chambers. But now, with the final rulings delivered, Jack felt an overwhelming sense of vindication. The people who had betrayed and humiliated him were finally paying the price. It had started with Megan's employer, a prestigious marketing firm whose leadership had been blindsided by the lawsuit. The evidence Adam presented, a trove of incriminating emails, videos, and financial records, painted a damning picture of workplace misconduct. Lucas, Megan's boss, had not only abused his position to engage in a relationship with her, but had also jeopardized the company's reputation by facilitating improper deals with Megan's clients. In the settlement negotiations, the company had little room to maneuver. They offered $3.5 million in damages to avoid further litigation and negative press. Lucas, meanwhile, was fired in disgrace, his career in shambles. Jack couldn't help but savor the poetic justice. The fallout didn't stop there. One of Megan's clients, a yoga studio owner named Linda Hastings, found herself embroiled in the scandal. Linda had been one of Megan's confidants, not only aware of her affair with Lucas but actively encouraging her to use her position to manipulate financial arrangements. Emails recovered by Adam's team revealed a series of questionable transactions between Megan and Linda, including kickbacks and hidden profits at Jack's expense. Jack and Adam built a compelling case against Linda, leveraging her shady dealings and her complicity in Megan's deceit. The scandal rocked the yoga community, tarnishing Linda's reputation and causing a significant drop in her studio's clientele. Facing public backlash and a potentially ruinous court battle, Linda reluctantly agreed to a $5 million settlement to avoid further damage. Jack's victory wasn't just financial, it was a public reckoning. The settlements, combined with the exposure of Megan and her accomplices, sent a clear message. Betrayal had consequences, and Jack wasn't someone to be underestimated. On the day the final payments were wired into his account, Jack sat in Adam's office, sipping a glass of celebratory bourbon. Adam leaned back in his chair, a satisfied smile on his face. "Well, my friend," Adam said, raising his glass, "I'd say justice has been served." Jack nodded, the weight of the past year finally beginning to lift. "I couldn't have done it without you, Adam. You've been a rock through all of this." "Hey, you did the hard part," Adam replied. "I just made sure the law did what it's supposed to." Later that evening, Jack sat alone in his living room, staring at the check stubs and settlement papers spread across the coffee table. The money was substantial, enough to rebuild his life entirely. But it wasn't just about the financial windfall. It was about reclaiming his sense of self, his dignity, and his future. For so long, Jack had felt like a victim, caught in a whirlwind of lies and betrayal. But now, as he looked around his quiet, comfortable home, he felt something he hadn't in years: peace. The people who had wronged him were gone from his life, their schemes exposed and their reputations in ruins. Jack, meanwhile, was free to move forward, to rebuild, and to start anew. And with $8.5 million in the bank, the possibilities were endless. As the evening wore on, Jack poured himself another glass of bourbon and raised it in a quiet toast to the future. "To new beginnings," he murmured, a faint smile on his lips. The past was behind him, and the road ahead was his to choose. For the first time in what felt like forever, Jack felt ready to take the first step. The final chapter of Jack's ordeal unfolded in the courtroom during the divorce proceedings. It was the last tie binding him to Megan, the woman who had once shared his life, but had since become a symbol of betrayal. While the legal battles against Megan's associates had been cold, calculated, and financially rewarding, this confrontation felt personal, a chance to reclaim his dignity in a very public way. Megan arrived at court dressed impeccably, as always, her expression carefully neutral. But Jack could see the cracks in her composure, the slight hesitation in her steps, the way she avoided eye contact with him, and the tightness in her jaw. The months of lawsuits and exposure had taken their toll. Her reputation was in tatters, her once-admired career reduced to a whisper of its former glory. The woman who had thrived on the admiration of others now lived under a cloud of judgment and scorn. The courtroom was filled with a quiet buzz, reporters and spectators eager to witness the final fallout of the scandal. Jack had stayed out of the spotlight for the most part, but Megan's name had become synonymous with betrayal and deceit. Now, the world was watching as the couple who had once seemed so perfect divided the remnants of their life together. The judge reviewed the terms of the settlement, her tone steady and impartial. Megan would receive the house they'd lived in during their marriage, as well as one of their cars, a sleek, black sedan that Jack no longer cared for. But beyond those material possessions, Megan was walking away with very little. Her attempts to claim more had been thwarted by the evidence Jack and his lawyer, Adam, had presented. The financial deceit, the affair, and her complicity in Lucas's downfall had left her with no leverage. The settlement wasn't about fairness, it was about consequence. When the judge finished outlining the terms, she asked if either party had any final statements. Jack stood, adjusting his tie as he turned to face Megan directly. "I do," he said, his voice calm but firm. The courtroom fell silent as Jack stepped forward. His eyes locked onto Megan's, and for a moment, the weight of their shared history hung between them. "Megan," he began, his voice steady, "we built a life together. I trusted you, I believed in you, and you threw it all away. For lies, for selfishness, for someone who didn't care about you the way I once did." Megan's composure faltered, her eyes glistening as she stared down at the table. "You didn't just betray me," Jack continued, his tone sharpening. "You betrayed the foundation of everything we stood for. Our marriage, our partnership, it meant nothing to you. You're not just someone who made a mistake. You're a traitor." The word hung in the air like a dagger. Megan flinched, her shoulders trembling as the tears she'd been holding back finally broke through. She covered her face with her hands, her quiet sobs echoing in the hushed courtroom. Jack didn't look away. He felt no pity, only a sense of finality. He had carried the burden of her betrayal for too long, and now he was finally free of it. The judge called for order, but the tension in the room was palpable. Reporters scribbled furiously, and spectators exchanged murmurs. Megan's tears were not just an emotional outburst. They were the last shred of her carefully constructed image crumbling in public view. When the proceedings ended, Jack left the courtroom with his head held high. The divorce was finalized, the legal battles were over, and Megan was out of his life for good. She kept the house and the car, but she had lost everything else that mattered: her reputation, her career, and the respect of those who once admired her. Outside the courthouse, Adam clapped Jack on the shoulder. "You did good in there," he said. Jack nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Thanks, Adam, for everything." As Jack walked away, the crisp air filled his lungs, and for the first time in years, he felt truly free. The past was behind him, and the future stretched out before him, uncharted and full of possibility. Megan's chapter in his life was closed, and Jack was ready to write a new one. 5 years had passed since the divorce, and Jack had rebuilt his life piece by piece. The bitterness and pain that had once consumed him were now distant memories. The settlements had left him financially secure, and he'd used the freedom to start fresh. He had traveled the world, taken up new hobbies, and even found love again with someone genuine. Someone who treated him with the respect and care he had always deserved. On an ordinary Friday night, Jack found himself at a cozy restaurant downtown, enjoying a quiet evening with a couple of friends. The atmosphere was warm, filled with the soft hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses. It was a place Jack frequented often, one of his favorite spots. He didn't expect anything out of the ordinary that evening, but life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. As he glanced around the room, his eyes landed on a familiar figure at a nearby table. At first, he thought he was mistaken, but as he looked closer, there was no doubt. It was Megan. She was seated with a man who appeared to be her fiancé, judging by the sparkling diamond on her left hand and the way they leaned close to each other. Megan looked different, older, perhaps a bit worn, but still carried herself with the same air of sophistication she always had. Jack watched as she laughed at something her fiancé said, the sound grating against the memories he had long buried. For a moment, Jack considered ignoring her. They hadn't spoken since the divorce, and he had no desire to rekindle that chapter of his life. But as he sat there, memories of her betrayal surfaced. The lies, the manipulation, the cold, calculated way she had tried to ruin him. The idea came to him suddenly, unbidden but irresistible. The past wasn't finished with Megan, even if she thought it was. Excusing himself from the table, Jack walked to the bar, where he pulled a napkin and pen from a small stack. His mind worked quickly, crafting the perfect message, just enough to pull the thread on the life Megan had built without outright confrontation. When he finished, he slipped the napkin into an envelope he always carried in his wallet for emergencies. The note was simple but damning. "Dear fiancé's name. You may think you know Megan, but there's more to her story than she's told you. Ask her about her affair with her old boss, the apartment she hid from me, and the lawsuits that destroyed her career. Some betrayals don't stay buried." Jack wrote Megan's name at the top of the envelope and folded it neatly. He flagged down the server who had been attending Megan's table and handed it to her. "For the woman at that table," he said with a nod. He returned to his seat, his heart steady as he sipped his drink and waited. It didn't take long for the effect to unfold. The server delivered the envelope to Megan, who glanced at it with confusion before opening it. As her eyes scanned the note, her face drained of color. She froze, her hands trembling as she tried to fold the napkin and tuck it out of sight. But her fiancé noticed her reaction. "What's wrong?" he asked, his tone curious but tinged with concern. Megan tried to brush it off, forcing a smile. "Nothing, just something weird. I'll handle it." But her fiancé wasn't convinced. He reached across the table, plucking the letter from her hands before she could stop him. His eyes narrowed as he read the words, his expression darkening with every passing second. "Megan," he said sharply, his voice low and dangerous. "What is this?" She stammered, her confident demeanor unraveling. It's nothing. It's from someone who hates me. It's just lies." Her fiancé didn't respond. He set the letter down and stared at her, his jaw tight. "Is it true?" "No. Of course not," Megan said, but her voice cracked, betraying her panic. Jack watched from his table, unnoticed in the corner, as the man stood abruptly, grabbing his coat. Megan reached for his arm, her voice rising in desperation. "Please don't go. It's not what you think," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. But her fiancé shook his head, his expression cold. "I don't know what to think anymore. Maybe I should." With that, he walked out of the restaurant, leaving Megan sitting there, stunned and humiliated. Jack felt no triumph, only a quiet satisfaction. He hadn't lied or exaggerated. He'd merely reminded Megan that the truth had a way of resurfacing. She had spent years crafting a new life, but the foundation of lies and betrayal couldn't hold forever. As Megan buried her face in her hands, sobbing quietly at the table, Jack stood, leaving enough cash to cover his tab before heading for the door. He didn't look back. The past was behind him, but for Megan, it had finally caught up.